Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to identify hardware on your Linux machine from the command line. So in front of you here I've got two terminals. The one on the left is my local desktop and the one on the right here is connected to a server. And I want to show you both because the output's a little bit different and so you can get a sense of what you'll see on a desktop machine versus a server machine. So the first thing you might want to look at is what kind of processor does my machine have, right? And so there's a series of commands that I call them the ls commands because they start with ls, which stands for list basically. And it's a fairly straightforward command, lscpu. This basically tells the machine to list the CPUs on your machine. And so here on the desktop machine, you'll see I have a i7-5960X. And amongst this, I'll tell you the architecture, it'll tell you the max and minimum frequency, and you'll see here that if you know the 5960X, I got this slightly overclocked, and the current core frequency, although I'm not really sure what that number means because this is a multi-core system, and you know which core is this frequency referring to, I don't know for sure. But one of the things that is probably pretty important to look at is this list of flags down here, and this basically tells you a list of the various features that your processor supports. And so, for example, let's say you're writing a program or you're running a program that needs the AES instruction. And so you can grep for this, and sure enough, it shows AES, and so therefore this processor supports that instruction. And if you needed it, it's available. Right. So let's do the same thing on the server side, lscpu. And so here you'll see this is a Xeon server processor. It's an E5-2680 V2, and it's running at 2800 megahertz here, and has this. This is probably its turbo speed at 3.6 gigahertz and whatnot. It does also. This is probably a fairly important thing to look at whether it supports virtualization or not. This VTX thing here, and in this case, this is actually a dual socket server system. So that's a little bit different from the desktop where you'll see sockets is 1. Right, and then on the server side you'll see sockets is 2, and so there's actually 2 of these E5-2680 V2 processors, and you'll see a total number of processors online is 40, right? So it's actually 210 cores with hyperthreading, so 20 times 2 gets you 40, right? And similarly, here's a list of flags to see if a particular feature is enabled. So one thing you might want to look at, does your server support virtualization? And so you can grep for something like VMX, and so therefore it is there, right? And so you can do the same thing for whatever other feature you might be interested in knowing whether your machine supports or not. All right, so that's how you look at your processor, and there's another way to do that as well, by the way. You can look at the contents of a file called proc/proc CPU info, and it'll basically give you the same type of information, but I find lscpu to give you kind of something a little bit more concise. But either way, you'll find the same type of information in both. So next thing, let's say we want to look at the amount of memory on the system. And in the past, what I would do, and probably a lot of people do as well, is you can run the command free, and this will tell you how much free memory you have. And you can use the -m option, for example, to look at it in megabytes. And so here we have a total of this amount of megabytes, and then this is what's used, what's free, what's being shared, and what's being used as a cache, and how much is available. Right, and so same thing here on the desktop. You'll see this is a 32 gig machine, and this is actually a 256 gig machine. But there's also an ls command that will show you the same information and might be a little bit more concise. So which is lsmem for list memory. Right, and so here you'll see total online memory 32G for 32 gigs, and similarly on the server side you'll see total online memory 256 gigs. Right, so that's how you can see how much memory is on your system. Another thing that is pretty useful to know is, like, let's say you plug in a USB device and you want to see if it's actually being recognized in your system. And so there's a USB command, or a ls command for that as well. And you might be able to guess it's lsusb. And so here we have a listing of all the USB devices connected to my desktop computer. And for example, you'll see the Logitech webcam that I'm using to record the audio for this video is connected via USB here. And there's some other things here like my Bluetooth dongle that is also connected to this machine as well. And so similarly, let's do the same thing on the server side. And so here, you won't see as much because I don't have a webcam connected to my server or anything like that, but I've got some UPSs connected to the server, so you'll see there's a connection to the APC UPS here, and a whole bunch of other things. So whenever you plug in a USB device and you just want to see if it's being recognized by the system, you basically run lsusb. But now let's say you want to know a little bit more about a particular USB device, right? And so you can, the lsusb command actually has some options to allow you to do that. Now I'll run the man page here on the right side so you can kind of see the options you have available to you. But let's say I want to look at my webcam and I want to know a little bit more about it. So I can run lsusb and I'll do a -s and I'll give it the bus and device number. So that's right here on the left here. The bus is 003 and device number is 006. So I'll do 003:006. And if I just run it like this, it'll show me exactly what I saw earlier, except that it'll only select out that one particular device, which is the webcam. But there's also a verbosity or verbose flag here, and that'll give me more information about this particular device. It's actually very verbose, so I'm going to pipe this into less so we can kind of take a look at it slowly. So here's the output, and here's the vendor information, so a Logitech webcam. Here's the product ID. There's some audio streaming capability. Obviously this is a webcam, so you would expect that. And a whole bunch of other information here. Let's see if I go back here to this. Max power, so it'll tell you, how much maximum power it's designed to draw. And down here you'll probably also find this being a webcam, some video interface stuff. So anyway, this is how you can look at the details of your USB device when you plug something in, or if you just want to see what's plugged in. So lsusb is your friend if you want to look for USB devices. Now let's say that USB device happens to be a external hard drive of some sort, or any particular hard drive. You want to look at your connected storage devices. And so the command for that, also an ls command, is lsscsi. Okay, and so here on my desktop machine, you'll see I have a bunch of devices connected here. I've got 8 Western Digital hard drives and a Samsung SSD. Now, I know the command says lsscsi, and you might be thinking, oh, this is only for SAS devices, but it's not. It also covers ATA, as you see here. So, so your SATA devices will also show up in this command as well. Now let's do something similar also on the server side, just to kind of show you the difference here. Now on the server side here, I've got 12 Hitachi drives you'll see listed here. I've got some SSD devices also here. But because the server has a backplane, whereas on the desktop these are directly connected via cable, here I actually have a backplane on the server that and it has an expander chip. And so the expander chip also shows up under lscsi because it has its own SAS address and all that. And so it's an LSI chip. It's a SAS2 expander chip, and it'll identify itself as an enclosure device, not a disk device. Right? So that's kind of the differences between what you might see on a server versus a desktop machine. Now this shows you the connected storage devices, but within a storage device, you might have multiple partitions, and each partition will count as a separate block device, right? So let's say you want to see all the different block devices, and so there's an ls command for that as well. That's lsblk, and that'll show you all the block devices that are available on your system. And so here I have it also on the server side, and the listing's a little bit longer because there's just more stuff there. But here you'll see, for example, the SDA device, which is my boot disk, has two partitions, SDA1 and SDA2, and then SDA2 is actually managed by LVM, and so I've got a logical volume on that as well for the root and home, and I've got a regular partition just for /boot on my SDA device. Now the other devices, SDB through SDI here, these are managed under ZFS, and so ZFS has its own kind of partition scheme. It creates a 1 partition and 9 partition, and so that's all you're seeing there. But this lsblk will show you all those partitions that are available. And similarly on the server side, so if we look over here on the right, I've got 12 hard drives also managed by ZFS, and so you'll see they all have similarly a 1st and 9th partition. And then down here there are, I think those are the SSDs, and then this is, these two down here are my boot drives. They're a pair of SSDs that are mirrored. And so you'll see here also, let's say SDQ1 and SDR1 are part of a software RAID 1 right here for my boot partition. And so this MD126, MD126 here as well. So these two partitions are mirrored as a RAID 1 volume. And similarly, this MD127, MD127 here are also a RAID 1, and this is kind of for my operating system. So there are logical volumes here for the root partition, var, /var log, and whatnot. So if you want to look at the various block devices on your hard drive, lsblk will tell you that. And so one of the use cases where this kind of these commands come in useful, so let's say you plug in an external USB hard drive, right? And you want to see, first of all, if it's connecting. And so you can run lsusb to see if it's available. And once it's there, you can run lscsi to see if it's showing up as a storage device. And once let's say that all turns out well, then you want to see, let's say, it's not automatically mounting, but you want to see what kind of partitions are on that external drive. You can run lsblk, and you can look for the partitions that are on that external drive and decide how you want to mount it or what you want to do with it. Okay, so that's how you can kind of combine all those commands together as you're trying to probe through your machine to see what's connecting or what's not connecting and whatnot. Now, let's say that you install a brand new PCI card. Could be a new video card, a new network adapter, or maybe a storage controller of some sort. And so there's a way to look at that as well. And as you might guess, the command starts with an ls, and it's lspci to look at all your PCI devices. And so on my desktop system, it's a pretty extensive listing here. This particular system actually has a motherboard that has this PCI switch here, so it's got a lot of PCI devices connected here. But let's look at something in particular. I know on this system I have a SAS controller, so I'm gonna grep for LSI. It's an LSI controller. So okay, here is the serial attached SCSI controller, right? And it's an LSI logic SAS 3008, and it tells you it's a SAS 3 device. So it tells me that this PCI device is properly connecting. And similarly on my server, here's the full listing of all the things that are shown when you run just lspci. So very, very long list, lots of things connected. It's a dual socket system, so a lot of stuff there. But let's say we want to look at the LSI. There's an LSI controller here too. And so this is a slightly different controller. This is a SAS 2308 based controller. It's a SAS 2 controller. And so this shows me that, and that there's actually this other thing here. This is actually a PCIe flash SSD that has an LSI controller as well. But let's say that you want to know a little bit more about that particular device. And so you would do that by doing lspci-s to specify the device. And so you need to give it the address, the PCI address. And so that's this number at the very beginning of the line. And so in this case, I will just do that. Now, if you just do this, you'll just see exactly what you grepped out earlier. But there is a -v, and I think for more detailed information, you can do multiple V's for a higher verbosity. And if you run it with that option, it'll show you a whole bunch of more information about that particular PCI device. And so in this case, you'll see that, well, here subsystem says LSI logic. It's a SAS 9300-8i. It's on physical slot number 4. And there's a bunch of other information here. One of the things that I pay attention to sometimes is link capability and link status. So this is link capability. So this tells you that it has the capability to run at 8 GT per S here at width x8. And so that basically says it can link at PCIe 3.0 speeds, because that's what 8 is. And then it's 8 PCIe lane device. And so this is link capability. And so this is what it's actually capable of doing. Now, what is it actually doing? You would look at link status. And so here, indeed, it's connecting at PCIe 3.0 speeds and at 8 lanes. And so this is working as expected. But let's say, you know, you bought a second-hand card or something like that, and perhaps one of the resistors on the PCI connector got knocked off and it's missing a lane or so. When you plug this in, you can look at this to see if it's actually connecting at all the lanes that it's capable of connecting at. Or perhaps maybe you plugged it into a wrong slot, that, you know, they have PCI slots that are physically larger than what's actually electrically available in them. And so let's say you had an 8-lane card and you accidentally plugged it into a 4-lane slot, and you can look it up here to see what it's actually connecting at and identify if you're, you know, doing things the way you expect it to work. So, all right, so that's how you do, or that's how you would get more information on a particular PCI device. I'll do the same thing here on the server side. So here I'm going to look at this 2308 controller. So I'll give it that address, and I'll do the -VV as well. And so here you'll see that this control is actually on a Supermicro motherboard, so it's subsystem Supermicro Inc. Here it tells you that. Let's look back here at link capability. So this is also a PCIe 3.0 card at 8 lanes, and indeed it is linking at that particular speed. And this is an onboard card, so you kind of expect that to work like that. But anyway, there's yeah, so you can get more information with this lspci command on a particular PCI device. And then something that might be useful is look at the very bottom here. What driver, kernel driver, is actually being used to drive this device? And so, you know, if you happen to have a device that maybe can be driven by multiple drivers, say like a video card, where you can either use like the open source version or the binary provided by the manufacturer, you can see what's actually driving that particular PCI device. So in this case, this is MPT2 SAS driver that's driving this 2308 SAS controller, whereas over here, this is the MPT3 SAS driver that's driving the LSI controller on my desktop. All right, so so that's how you would look at PCI devices, and you can go through the whole list of PCI devices in the original listing and kind of look at each one of these individually in more detail if you wanted to do that. Now, all that said, earlier I think I told you that, like, if you want to look at memory, you can run lsmem, right? And then if you didn't know about lsmem, you might have known about the free command, and that will also tell you roughly that, you know, you've got, in this case, 32 gigs of RAM in this machine, and the same thing here on the server. I've got 256 gigs of RAM on that machine. But let's say you wanted to know a little bit more about that. Let's say maybe you're having some memory problems, or maybe you want to know exactly how many DIMMs are used to build up this 32 gigs or this 256 gigs of RAM. And so there's a command that will get you a whole bunch of information, including this memory information, and it's called DMI decode. And there's a lot of information that comes out of this command, so I'm going to run it through the less, so we can kind of go through this a little bit. First of all, it shows you a lot of BIOS information, and so here you'll find that I've got the American Megatrends BIOS version P3.4, and the date is April. Release date on that BIOS is April 6, 2018. And so this might be useful, for example, if you're looking for a new BIOS update to your machine, and you want to know what version you currently have, instead of shutting down your machine and rebooting and trying to see that in the BIOS, you can basically just run this command and get that information and go search online to see if there's a newer version of your BIOS that you maybe want to upgrade to. In addition to that, you'll also see here, so let me just scroll down a little bit here. My motherboard here on my desktop machine is an ASRock X99 Extreme 11, and I have the serial number here. And so this is also very useful too if, let's say you're having a problem and you're contacting technical support and they want you to, prove that you actually own this particular motherboard, and they ask for a serial number. So instead of like opening up your computer or rebooting it just to get into the BIOS to find this information, you can run this command to find the information and provide that to technical support. Now this is on the desktop, and so if you didn't know this command, you could go open up your computer and find it, perhaps on a sticker somewhere printed on the motherboard. But if you're on a server, then it gets a little bit more complicated. Let's say if your server is co-located somewhere far away, and you got to drive 30 minutes to go open a server. Well, then that's not a lot of fun. And so knowing this command will really help you out in that sense. So so here, instead of driving 30 minutes to the data center to go open up the server just to find this number, you can run this command, and here it'll tell you, oh, this is Supermicro server, here's the product number, here's the serial number, and you can provide this information to support as you need. And here's also the motherboard and the motherboard serial number as well. So there's a lot of information here that would be really useful to have, especially if you don't have physical access or easily have physical access to the machine. This information can be very helpful and save you a trip. So now going back to the original question, I was asking, like, okay, you've got so many gigs of RAM, but you want to know how many DIMMs there are and what kind of DIMMs there are. So let me just do a quick search. There's so much information that comes out of DMID code. I'm just going to do a search for memory. And so here we've got the physical array, tells me that I can have a max number of 8 and a max capacity of 512 gigabytes. Okay, well that's all nice to know, but here's okay, so here's like the first memory device. So this is pretty helpful. This tells me, first it's telling me about DIMM A1, right? So I can identify where that is on the motherboard. Should I, say have a problem with this particular DIMM, I'll know where to look. And this is a 4 gig DIMM, that tells me that, and here's the speed. This is a DDR4, and here's the part number. Right, so let's say maybe I'm having problems with a particular DIMM and I want to replace it, but I want to replace it with the exact same part number. So instead of prying open your computer and pulling the DIMM out to find out what it is, you can actually just look here and go order yourself this equivalent part to replace it without having the hassle of opening up your machine to find that information. Right, and again, on a desktop machine where you might have local access fairly easily, that might be okay, but on a server where you might not have physical access easily, this is real lifesaver. So here, let's look at this. Okay, so here's a memory device, and this is a 16 gig module. This is in DIMM P1, DIMM A1, so that's on the first processor, DIMM A1, and this is a DDR3, and here's the manufacturer. It's a Hynix module, and this is the part number. And so if you need to replace this and you wanted to order the exact part, here's the part number. Or let's say maybe this module is still under warranty and you're trying to process the warranty to get it replaced, and they want a serial number, and so here you are with the serial number. And so instead of having to run down to the data center and find this information physically on the box, and then make that phone call to tech support or to place that order, you can basically just look this information up right here without physically getting access to the box. Right. So that's very, very convenient to know how to find this information when you need it. And so all that said, I want to conclude this video with one final command that perhaps I should start at the beginning with, but I wanted to leave this for last because it kind of just summarizes everything that I've shown you just now. Now, of course, if you wanted more detailed information, the commands I just showed you will get you that information. But if you just wanted to kind of get a high-level overview of all the hardware that's connected on your machine, there's a very nice command that summarizes all the information for you. And in the background, I believe it calls the same commands that I just told you about, all the ls commands and DMID code and whatnot. And anyway, this command is called INXI. And if you run this, and I'll do -fm, which I think gives me the full output with memory information, it extracts all that information that I was showing you earlier step by step into kind of a single output, and so that's very convenient if you just want to take a quick look at everything, right? And so here it'll even tell you kind of my operating system. I'm running a Fedora 28 here, the motherboard model, and here's a serial number again, so that's very helpful. And the BIOS state shows you each of the memory devices it found. This is probably coming out of DMID code. And my processor and the core speeds of each core here. It shows that I've got a 1080 Ti graphics card here, and the version of the driver that I'm using. Audio devices, so you'll see multiple audio devices here because I've got an onboard motherboard sound card and the one that comes on the HDMI output of the video card, and then my Logitech webcam also has a mic that I'm using to record this video with. And so all the audio devices are listed here, and the various Ethernet cards, the various storage devices here, and it'll even tell you some sensor information about the temperatures on the CPU and motherboard, and the fan speeds and all that information. So this is all very useful information. If you just want to kind of get a quick overview of all the hardware on your machine, run INXI, and then from there, if you wanted to know more details, you can run the lspci or any other commands to get more detailed information. Now let's do the same thing on the server side, and it's going to be a little bit different just because it's a different set of hardware. So a little bit more output than on the desktop here, as you'll see. But here again, tells you I'm running CentOS 7.5, serial number of motherboard, or serial number of the server, serial number of the motherboard, BIOS, BIOS release date, the 16 DIMM modules here, the dual socket Xeon with 10 cores each. All this information is here, and then because you've got 20 cores with hyper-threading, there's identifies the core speeds for 40 cores here. And so here's might be something different that you might not see on a desktop system, but here's all the network connectivity. So I've got two 10 gig Ethernet ports in here, and then 4 regular gigabit Ethernet ports. And then there's a whole bunch of these VNets, and those are just virtual interfaces for the virtual machines that are running on this host. So you'll see a lot of that information here as well. And so it'll also show you the MAC addresses, and so that might be useful information to look at as well. Let's say you're connecting to a network that requires registration of your MAC address before it's allowed on the network, so you can look it up here to figure out what your MAC address is. And here's a list of the 12 Hitachi hard drives and the SSDs, and then the software RAID and the ZFS and all that good information there. And also you'll have again the sensor information. So here are the CPU temperatures and the fan speeds and whatnot. And so anyway, INXI, a great command to kind of just get a full summary of everything on your machine. And then if you need more details, you can run the commands I previously talked about here. So hopefully that's helpful to anybody out there who's learning Linux and want to know how to look at your hardware from the command line. So anyway, that's it. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.